Could it be that silence, the very thing we often avoid, is actually our greatest strength? Let me tell you something the world rarely teaches, but life certainly will. In this noisy age of opinions, arguments, and endless shouting matches, power isn't in volume, it's in presence. People often mistake loudness for leadership, thinking that the one who shouts the first or shouts the longest somehow wins. But real power doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't chase attention or prove itself to the crowd. True power walks in quietly, and the whole room shifts. It doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't clamor for a spotlight. It simply is, and its weight is felt without a word. Silence, my friend, is not the retreat of someone afraid to speak. It's the steady heartbeat of someone who knows exactly who they are. It's the calm confidence of one who has seen too many storms to be shaken by noise. Think of someone who's been through battle, who's weathered betrayal, chaos, and misunderstanding. They don't shout at the wind anymore. They know who calms the waves. Just imagine Jesus before Pilate, surrounded by accusations, insults, and spit. Did he shout, defend, argue, number? He stood silent, not because he was weak, but because he had already won. That silence was his answer. That silence thundered with authority. There are moments in your life when silence is the highest form of strength. Not because you're out of words, not because you're lost or confused, but because that moment doesn't deserve your peace. It doesn't deserve your power. You weren't called by a crowd. You were called by God. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for a calling they didn't witness. You don't need to defend your journey to people who were never meant to walk beside you. Silence is a language of growth. It's maturity wrapped in stillness. It's the refusal to let chaos pull you out of character. It's easy to react, but it takes real strength to stay still. Anyone can shout. Few can trust God enough to walk away in quiet. And when you choose silence, you're not surrendering to the storm, you're surrendering to the one who reigns over it. You're not letting people walk over you. You're letting God elevate you above the noise. That's a different kind of power altogether. Could it be that silence, the very thing we often avoid, is actually our greatest strength? Let me tell you something the world rarely teaches, but life certainly will. In this noisy age of opinions, arguments, and endless shouting matches, power isn't in volume, it's in presence. People often mistake loudness for leadership, thinking that the one who shouts the first or shouts the longest somehow wins. But real power doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't chase attention or prove itself to the crowd. True power walks in quietly, and the whole room shifts. It doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't clamor for a spotlight. It simply is, and its weight is felt without a word. Silence, my friend, is not the retreat of someone afraid to speak. It's the steady heartbeat of someone who knows exactly who they are. It's the calm confidence of one who has seen too many storms to be shaken by noise. Think of someone who's been through battle, who's weathered betrayal, chaos, and misunderstanding. They don't shout at the wind anymore. They know who calms the waves. Just imagine Jesus before Pilate, surrounded by accusations, insults, and spit. Did he shout, defend, argue, number? He stood silent, not because he was weak, but because he had already won. That silence was his answer. That silence thundered with authority. There are moments in your life when silence is the highest form of strength. Not because you're out of words, not because you're lost or confused, but because that moment doesn't deserve your peace. It doesn't deserve your power. You weren't called by a crowd. You were called by God. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for a calling they didn't witness. You don't need to defend your journey to people who were never meant to walk beside you. Silence is a language of growth. It's maturity wrapped in stillness. It's the refusal to let chaos pull you out of character. It's easy to react, but it takes real strength to stay still. Anyone can shout. Few can trust God enough to walk away in quiet. And when you choose silence, you're not surrendering to the storm, you're surrendering to the one who reigns over it. You're not letting people walk over you. You're letting God elevate you above the noise. That's a different kind of power altogether. If you can master the discipline of silence, you will enter rooms your enemies swore you'd never step foot in. You will receive blessings the world said you were unworthy of. And when that moment comes, don't clap back. Don't throw shade. Don't even say, "I told you so." Just smile. Just keep walking. Because that's what the silent do. They don't announce victory. They live it. So today, make the decision. Stay silent. Stay grounded. Let God speak on your behalf. You're not staying silent because you're weak. You're silent because you're wise. You're not quiet because you're afraid. You're quiet because you trust the one who fights your battles. You're not silent because you have nothing to say, but because you know who speaks on your behalf. So be still, and just watch what God will do next. Because sometimes in life, it's not about what you say, it's about what you surrender. There will be moments when God calls you into silence and not to punish you, but to prepare you. He'll ask you to step back, to quiet your thoughts, and to trust Him completely. And here's the surprising truth. God often works most when we speak least. We live in a world addicted to noise. Everyone's talking, everyone's posting, everyone's desperate to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. But heaven doesn't move at the sound of chaos. Heaven responds to faith. And real faith? Real faith doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, real faith simply listens. It kneels down in the quiet and whispers, "God, I trust you, even when I don't understand." There are blessings being delayed not because you're unworthy, but because your spirit is too noisy to hear divine instruction. How can we follow God's direction if we're busy filling every space with our own thoughts and opinions? If you can master the discipline of silence, you will enter rooms your enemies swore you'd never step foot in. You will receive blessings the world said you were unworthy of. And when that moment comes, don't clap back. Don't throw shade. Don't even say, "I told you so." Just smile. Just keep walking. Because that's what the silent do. They don't announce victory. They live it. So today, make the decision. Stay silent. Stay grounded. Let God speak on your behalf. You're not staying silent because you're weak. You're silent because you're wise. You're not quiet because you're afraid. You're quiet because you trust the one who fights your battles. You're not silent because you have nothing to say, but because you know who speaks on your behalf. So be still, and just watch what God will do next. Because sometimes in life, it's not about what you say, it's about what you surrender. There will be moments when God calls you into silence and not to punish you, but to prepare you. He'll ask you to step back, to quiet your thoughts, and to trust Him completely. And here's the surprising truth. God often works most when we speak least. We live in a world addicted to noise. Everyone's talking, everyone's posting, everyone's desperate to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. But heaven doesn't move at the sound of chaos. Heaven responds to faith. And real faith? Real faith doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes, real faith simply listens. It kneels down in the quiet and whispers, "God, I trust you, even when I don't understand." There are blessings being delayed not because you're unworthy, but because your spirit is too noisy to hear divine instruction. How can we follow God's direction if we're busy filling every space with our own thoughts and opinions? And the more you run to noise, the more you keep seeking relief and distraction, the longer you'll delay the answer that only arrives in the quiet. There's a reason why Jesus often withdrew from the crowds. He wasn't tired of healing. He wasn't avoiding people. He knew something we so often forget. Stillness with the Father revives the soul. It resets your thinking. It realigns your purpose. You can't keep pouring out to others if you're constantly surrounded by noise. Even the Savior had to be still in order to remain strong. Now I want to speak to the one who feels unheard. You've been praying, crying, asking, waiting, and yet it feels like heaven is silent. You've been wondering, why isn't God answering me? But maybe Maybe the silence isn't God's absence, it's His alignment. Maybe He's not ignoring you. Maybe He's inviting you to stop speaking long enough, to finally listen. And if you lean in, you might just realize He's been speaking all along. Through closed doors, through unanswered prayers, through things falling apart so something better can come together. It takes spiritual maturity to understand that God's silence doesn't mean He's stopped moving. Some of the greatest miracles are being formed in complete silence. The seed in the soil makes no sound, yet it's growing. The baby in the womb doesn't speak yet, life is taking shape. The caterpillar inside the cocoon is silent, but transformation is happening. So why do we think we must always make noise to see change? God is not moved by volume. He is moved by surrender. You don't have to remind God of the promises He made to you. He hasn't forgotten. But maybe He's waiting for your stillness before releasing them. Maybe He's waiting for your silence before revealing the next open door. Because it's in that stillness that your eyes begin to open. Your ears grow sharper. Your faith goes deeper. But what happens when you're finally quiet enough to hear God say, "This is the way"? And when that moment comes, when His voice breaks through the noise, something shifts inside you. You don't just receive the blessing, you're ready to carry it. So stop trying to outtalk your fears. Stop trying to drown out your doubts with louder noise. You don't have to outshout your enemies. You don't have to post about it. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to explain what God is doing in your life. Just be still. God is not deaf to your prayers. He's not late in His timing. He's just waiting for you to be quiet long enough to hear His whisper. This is the way, walk in it. But we rarely realize how valuable our peace is until we start losing it. Until we find ourselves completely drained, not from doing God's work, but from fighting pointless battles, from wasting energy on conversations that go nowhere, from constantly defending ourselves to people who've already made up their minds, from reacting to every comment, every glance, every passive-aggressive post. And then it hits you like a wave crashing against the shore. Your peace is more precious than your point. That's when silence becomes more than a pause, it becomes your shield. Because there are things in life that simply aren't worth your voice. Not because you don't care, not because you're weak, but because you've finally matured enough to realize. Maturity doesn't react, it responds. And most of the time, the best response is silence. Here's the cost we don't often count. Every time you respond to something that doesn't serve your purpose, you're spending your energy. You're paying with your focus. You're investing your attention in something that gives you nothing in return. And let's be honest, some of us are spiritually bankrupt. Not because God hasn't given us enough, but because we've spent it all on distractions that never deserved our time. We've let the noise drag us into arguments we were never called to fight. We've turned our peace into a public platform for debate. We've allowed our hearts to become targets for other people's projections. But listen to me clearly. You do not have to attend every argument you're invited to. Not every accusation deserves a rebuttal. Not every jab or rumor deserves a reaction. Some situations don't need your voice, they need your silence. Because silence is a boundary. And boundaries protect what's sacred. What's sacred? Your purpose, your calling, your relationship with God. And when you respond to every little offensive whisper of gossip, every digital jab designed to provoke you, you're handing your peace to people who never earned it and can't protect it. When you respond to every attack, defend every decision, and explain every move, that's not wisdom. That's self-sabotage. There comes a moment in your walk with God where silence is no longer weakness, it's reverence. You stop reacting not because of who they are, but because of who He is. You no longer feel the need to control the narrative because you know the battle isn't yours. The weight? Not yours to carry. The outcome? Not yours to manage. All God asks of you is this: stand still, hold on to your peace, and let Him fight for you. There's a beautiful verse in Isaiah that says, "In quietness and trust shall be your strength." That's not just poetic, it's practical, it's powerful. Because when you stop chasing noise, stop trying to be heard, stop reacting to every push and pull from the world around you, you'll discover something deeper within you. A strength that isn't from this world. A clarity that doesn't come from external validation. A peace that can't be shaken because it wasn't built on applause. It comes from surrender. It comes from trust. And I get it, it's not easy. It's not easy to stay quiet when you're misunderstood. It's not easy to hold your tongue when people lie about your name. It's not easy to walk away when everything inside you wants to prove you're right. But listen closely. God isn't calling you to win arguments. He's calling you to win the war within. He's not asking you to be right in the eyes of the crowd. He's asking you to be righteous in His sight. That means you don't have to explain why you let go of certain relationships. You don't have to justify why you didn't reply to every message. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. Sometimes, the most spiritual thing you can do is smile, say nothing, and keep walking. Because your silence, that's your growth. Your silence, that's your healing. Your silence, that's your strength. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them get it wrong. Because here's the truth. They talked about Jesus too. They lied. They mocked. They misunderstood. But still He fulfilled His purpose. Still He rose again. Still He changed the world. Not with arguments, but with obedience. Not with noise, but with presence. And if Jesus, knowing full well who He was, could stand in silence before His accusers, then so can you. You don't have to defend yourself when heaven is already defending you. You don't have to react when your reaction could cost you your peace. Just because someone is loud doesn't mean they're right. And just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes, silence is the loudest declaration that your spirit belongs to God, not to people's opinions. So if you truly want to grow, if you truly want to walk in peace, then protect your energy, guard your mind, and be very selective about what deserves your voice. Because your voice is powerful. Anything powerful must be protected. And sometimes, the strongest protection you can offer is silence. Be silent and let peace become your fiercest weapon. There's a reason God tells us, again and again, be still. Not just to stop moving, but to calm the inner storm, to quiet the racing thoughts, the anxious heartbeats, the mental chaos we often carry. Because silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the presence of trust. It's the quiet whisper of your soul that says, "Lord, I don't know what you're doing right now, but I believe you're doing something good." And that kind of silent, sacred surrenderedness where strength is born. But let's be honest, most of the time, we're too busy. Busy talking, busy worrying, busy overthinking, over-planning, overreacting. We convince ourselves that if we just say more, plan more, stress more, then maybe something will finally shift. But faith doesn't grow in noise. It grows in stillness. It flourishes when you stop asking why and start declaring, "God, I trust you anyway." Real trust shows up not when everything is clear, but when everything is dark. When the path ahead feels blurry, when the prayers seem unanswered, when the doors remain closed. That's where faith steps in. And that's where silence becomes power. Not the silence of hopelessness, but the silence of confidence. The kind of deep, unshaken confidence that says, even if I don't understand this moment, I know who holds tomorrow. You see, God doesn't always explain Himself. He doesn't always give us the details we crave, but He always promises His presence. And sometimes, He's just waiting for you to stop talking long enough to feel it. Because you can't hear the whisper of the Holy Spirit when your mind is consumed by fear and your mouth is filled with complaints. But if you can calm the storm within, you'll begin to realize He's been there all along. Some of you right now are walking through a season that doesn't make any sense. You're trying to trust, but nothing is moving. No doors are opening. No progress, no answers, no change. And it's tempting you're tempted to panic, to go back, to settle, to speak, to act, to force something to happen. But what if the most powerful thing you can do in this moment is nothing? What if your greatest strength right now is simply to stand still, to trust, to be silent, and let God be God? Think back to the children of Israel standing at the edge of the Red Sea, the enemy closing in behind them, the sea blocking their way forward. No escape, no options. And what did God say? Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. He didn't tell them to build a boat. He didn't say, run. He didn't instruct them to scream, to plan, or to panic. He said, stand, be still, and trust. The moment they obeyed, when they stopped striving and simply trusted the sea split wide open. That's the kind of God we serve. A God who makes a way when there is absolutely no way. A God who doesn't always move at the sound of our voice, but sometimes He moves when we stop speaking altogether. When we stop panicking. When we stop clinging to control. When we finally reach that sacred place and say, God, I surrender this completely to you. Because you can't ask God to write your story while you're still trying to hold the pen. At some point, you have to lay it down. You have to open your hands and say, even if I can't see it, Lord, I will trust you. Even if I don't hear you, I know you're near. Even if I don't feel anything shifting, I believe you are working behind the scenes. That kind of trust, the quiet, deep, unwavering kind is what moves heaven. It's easy to say we trust God when things are going our way. When the doors open, when the blessings flow, when the answers come quickly. But what about when the door stays closed? When the prayers seem unanswered? When all you hear is silence? That's when true trust is tested. That's when silence becomes your strength. Because real trust doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just waits quietly, humbly, without timelines, without explanations, without control. It waits because it knows deep down that God is too faithful to fail, too good to forget, and far too wise to ever make a mistake. So don't let the silence scare you. Don't let the delay make you doubt. God hasn't left you. He hasn't abandoned you. He hasn't forgotten the promise. No, He's building something in you. He's teaching you how to walk by faith and not by sight. He's showing you that you don't need all the answers. You just need Him. And one day, when the silence finally breaks and the blessing comes rushing in like a flood, you'll look back and understand why the wait was necessary. You'll thank God that He didn't let you move too fast. You'll thank Him that He didn't answer too soon. You'll thank Him for holding you in that quiet, sacred place until your heart was truly ready to receive what your words would have ruined. So trust Him. Trust Him in the silence. Trust Him when everything inside you wants to panic. Trust Him when it doesn't make sense. Because sometimes the loudest kind of faith is the quietest heart. Now let's talk about what it means to stay silent when life starts shifting around you and God begins to rearrange the people in your story. Be silent, hand. Let your trust speak louder than your words. There comes a moment in life when God starts removing certain voices from your circle, and if you're not grounded, you'll misread the moment. You'll think it's punishment when really, it's preparation. You'll think you're being rejected when in truth, you're being protected. And it's in moments like that when silence becomes more than just a posture, it becomes a form of survival. Because not everyone who starts the journey with you is meant to finish it. Not everyone who clapped for you in one season is meant to walk with you into the next. And sometimes, the most painful part of growth is outgrowing the people you once thought you'd never have to live without. But here's the truth. You don't have to post about it. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to defend the distance. Be silent and let God do the separating. Some relationships are seasonal. Some friendships were only meant for a chapter, not the entire book. And when God begins to turn the page in your story, it is not your job to cling to characters who were never meant to appear in the next scene. You don't need closure when you have peace. You don't need revenge when you've already been released. You don't need to chase the people who walked away when God is calling you forward. But let's be real. The flesh wants answers, doesn't it? We want to know, why did they change? Why did they leave? Why did they lie? Why did they treat us that way? And more than anything, we want to speak. We want to expose the betrayal. We want to confront the dishonor. We want to explain ourselves. We want to defend our name. But hear this, friend. Silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. It's the kind of wisdom that says, God, I trust that what you reveal in time will speak louder than anything I could say today. You don't have to broadcast the pain they caused. You don't need to drag their name through the mud. God saw it all. He heard the conversations that happened behind closed doors. He saw the doors they tried to shut in your face. He witnessed the manipulation, the gossip, the sabotage. But he also said, vengeance is mine, not yours, not your words, not your emotions, his. And when you hand the battle over to him, silence becomes a weapon, not a passive retreat, but a powerful statement of faith. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than any argument. A kind of silence that confuses the enemy. A silence that declares, I know who I am. I know whose I am. And I don't need to fight for a seat at any table because God has already prepared one for me in the presence of my enemies. When you walk in that kind of silence, you're walking in divine confidence. Not because you have all the answers, not because you're perfect, but because you are protected. But what if the silence wasn't just for your protection, but for your transformation? Sometimes, the people who walked away from you had to. Not because you weren't valuable, but because their presence was crowding out God's voice. Sometimes, the betrayal wasn't to break you, it was to purify your heart. Sometimes, the silence wasn't a punishment, it was necessary. Because their noise was drowning out your ability to discern what God was really saying. And when God removes someone from your life, He doesn't need your permission. He only asks for your obedience. We don't always understand it in the moment, do we? We don't always see the purpose behind the pain. But one day you'll look back and realize that God wasn't taking something from you. He was saving you. Saving your time. Saving your destiny. Saving your soul. Some of the people God removed from your life weren't just distractions. They were delays. And in His mercy, He cleared space so that your purpose could finally breathe again. So don't try to reopen the door God already closed. Don't try to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Don't chase after the ones who already let go. Because the more you try to defend yourself, the more exhausted you'll become. But when you choose silence, when you surrender the pain instead of rehearsing it, when you trust God to handle what's happening behind the scenes, that's when something beautiful starts to unfold. God restores you without your help. Healing doesn't come when you win the argument. It doesn't come when you finally post the truth. It doesn't come when they apologize. Healing comes when you can sit in the stillness and still sense the presence of God. When you can walk away not with bitterness, but with peace. When you can pray for them even if they cursed you with their words. That's when healing truly takes root. Because that kind of peace, it doesn't come from this world. It's not man-made. It's God-given. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're trying to make sense of a sudden loss. Maybe your heart is breaking over people you love deeply. Maybe you're tempted to speak up, to clear the air, to defend your character. But hear me, there's more strength in your silence than in your defense. Because the God who sees what happens in secret, He will reward you openly. And when that moment comes, no lie, no rumor, no betrayal will be able to stop what God has prepared for your life. So be silent. Let God remove who he needs to remove so he can make space for what he's about to do. Because there is something sacred, something holy about silence that's rooted in surrender. This isn't the silence of giving up. It's not the silence of fear or failure. It's the silence that says, Lord, I've said everything I can say. I've done everything I know how to do. Now, I let go. And I let you take over. That's the kind of silence where miracles begin. Not when you try harder, but when you finally lay your weapons down. Not when you push through in your own strength, but when you surrender completely in faith, because life will stretch you. It will test your patience. There will be moments-long seasons, even when it feels like everything is stuck. Your dreams are stalled. Your prayers go unanswered. Your healing seems delayed. And it's in those moments that silence becomes sacred. Silence becomes soila, place where patience takes root and trust begins to grow. Because some of God's greatest works aren't revealed in the noise of progress. They're formed in the quiet of waiting. You may be praying for something right now desperately, faithfully, and it feels like heaven is silent. No sign, no answer, no change, nothing. But hear this. Just because you hear nothing doesn't mean God is doing nothing. His silence is not abandonment, it's preparation. God does some of his deepest work in quiet places. He shapes your character in the waiting. He tests your motives in the stillness. He purifies your desires in the delay. And here's the truth many people miss. Waiting in silence doesn't mean you're doing nothing. It means you're doing the hard, holy work of trusting. It means you show up every day with faith, even when you don't see results. You keep believing when doubt is screaming louder. You choose to rest in the promise and no wrestle with the process. That kind of faith, that kind of silence, it changes you. It matures you. Because when you learn to be silent in the face of delay, you start to live by faith, not by sight. You no longer need instant results to feel validated. You stop chasing applause, recognition, or the need to make sense of everything. Your confidence stops depending on outcomes and starts anchoring in the one who holds the outcome. That kind of silence isn't passive. It's powerful. It says, I don't have to rush what God is doing. I don't need to beg for what's already mine. I don't have to force open doors that God isn't ready to open yet. If God said it, I will stand on it. Even if I have to wait, quietly, in the hallway. And let me tell you something. The hallway can be holy ground. That place between the promise and the fulfillment, that space between what God said and what you see. It's where your roots go deeper. It's where your pride is stripped away. It's where your faith matures. Some of the most anointed men and women in the Bible didn't find God in noise. They didn't meet him in the applause, the victories, or the mountaintop moments. They found him in the stillness and seasons of silence and delay. Think of Joseph in a prison cell, David, alone in the wilderness, Moses wandering through the desert, even Jesus, lying silent in the tomb. Every one of them faced moments when it seemed like heaven had gone quiet. Every one of them endured divine delays, and yet in each of their stories, God was never late. He was right on time, because heaven doesn't move according to your clock. It moves according to his purpose. We often think silence means punishment, but sometimes silence is mercy. Because if God gave you what you asked for too early, it might crush you. If he opened the door before your heart was ready, it might turn into a burden instead of a blessing. God loves you too much to rush you into something you're not prepared to carry. So he waits. And in the waiting, he calls you into silence. Not to frustrate you, but to form you. To strengthen your spirit. To stretch your trust. To align your heart. To bring you to the end of your striving so you will finally lean into him completely. And then, when the time is right, when your spirit is steady, when your heart is pure, when your silence has become surrender, God moves. And when God moves, it won't be because of your effort. It won't be because of your hustle. It won't be because you forced it. It'll be because He ordained it. Because you waited in faith-filled silence and He honored your trust. But I won't pretend it's easy. It hurts when nothing changes. It's painful when prayers go unanswered. It feels like loss when your dreams start slipping through your fingers. But hear me. Your silence is not wasted. God hears the cry of your heart even when your lips don't move. He sees every tear you shed in private. He counts them. He treasures them. And in time, His perfect time, He responds. Not always when you want, but always when it's right. So be still. Be silent. Keep showing up with faith. Keep believing, even when it's quiet. Keep surrendering, even when it's hard. Let the silence teach you how to listen. Let it teach you how to wait. Let it teach you how to trust in ways you never have before. Because one day, the silence will break. And when it does, you'll look back and see God was working all along. Be silent, and let your surrender make space for the supernatural timing of God to unfold in your life. So, if this message has spoken to your heart, if you're in the hallway, in the stillness, in the waiting, don't rush through it. Stay present. Stay surrendered. Because the silence may just be the sound of your miracle being prepared.